Did you know that women worked in war production factories? Yeah, wow! Women in the US helped the war go smoothly by becoming Rosie the Riveters. Rosies helped build military tools that came in handy during battle. Rosie the Riveters. What a name! Imagine a young, informal woman holding a torch or even a saw. During the time of World War II, the US was filled with hard-working women. The same women who worked on the home front during World War II changed the way industry was run. They got jobs in the war industry to help support the troops in Europe, support business at home by keeping industry booming, and work at factories that build airplanes, tanks, warships, and ammunition to keep the troops armed and fighting for their country. Before World War II, women in the US usually lived as housewives. They stayed at home with their nanny and children and left work for the men. In result of this, women were considered to be unimportant. Men were needed in the war, so many were drafted, and jobs were left open for others. As you might know, the US was trying to recuperate from a depression, so if jobs weren't filled, then industry would plummet. Ads and campaigns were set up to recruit women for important jobs. Women happily responded to calls to keep Americans fed, moving, and communicating. The domestic workforce fell, and women wanted to do all they could to help out the US. They were sure that the end of the war would come soon. As a result, women were running business in the US. Weapons, ammunition, and resources that these women made were a crucial part of winning the war. Women took advantage of all these opportunities and made them count. Now that women were working, the number of working women in industrial production doubled. Uniforms for the military replaced the fashionable dresses that were made by women. Factories that produced silk produced parachutes. Wages in munition plants and aircraft factories averaged more than those of traditional female jobs. In fact, they were 40% higher. Women's jobs were as critical as the efforts of the soldiers themselves. The war effort brought about significant changes in the role of women in society as a whole. With the help of working women, the US was succeeding in its business and economy. Rosie the Riveters were making history. Thousands of vehicles and guns were being shipped to Europe from the US with the help of Rosies. This helped the industry in the US boom. Women suffered shortages of all varieties of consumer goods in the absence of the men. But in exchange for that, the unemployment problem ended in the United States. In countries that were fighting in World War II, resources were diverted from domestic uses to military uses. The military production was astounding. While the men were away, they didn't have to worry about how their economy was surviving back at home. Little did they know that once they won the war, they wouldn't have to worry about returning home and falling into another depression. The US was thriving and succeeding. That was how the US ought to be. War production was the highest it's ever been. Women everywhere pitched in to make it happen. Women were hired for many different types of jobs. All of these jobs were revolving around the idea of helping their country. As I said before, the military production was astounding. Over 100,000 tanks, 47 million tons of artillery ammunition, and 44 billion rounds of small armed ammunition. Time magazine called America's wartime production a miracle. The women of America became the war's unsung heroes. The output of American production exceeded that of 3 Axis nations combined. Factories operated round the clock to serve the needs of the war. All of this happened because women wanted to do more for their country, so they quit their useless jobs and signed up for war production. This made a powerful statement about the women in the US. Throughout the war, women worked 6 days a week, only had a handful of holidays, and were forced to take overtime to keep the assembly lines operating. More than 1 million women were admitted into a professional classification. Women in the US were thrilled and patriotic. Someone had to build the tanks and ammunition that supported the war, so a woman at home took care of it.
40% of fuselage workers at Willow Run are women. But the goal of a liberator an hour can't be reached until at least 20% more are added to take the places of inducted men.
Women in the U.S. helped the war go smoothly by becoming Rosie the Riveters. Rosies helped build military tools that came in handy during battle. Women in the U.S. got jobs in the war industry to help support the troops in Europe. They also made and kept industry at home booming. Women did this by building airplanes, tanks, warships, and ammunition. As you can see, without the women at home, the Allies would have never been able to win World War II.